Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
We are back with some more details about life on Scadrial to prepare us for the Lost Metal coming so soon now.
It is entirely possible by when you are listening to this episode that the Lost Metal is already out and you can go get it. However, if you're one of the super nerds and just getting this day of, we really appreciate you. We appreciate everyone, which is why we have prepared a deep look at Trellism and the set and how they are using, maybe abusing Trellism on Scadrial.
Yes, there is so much interesting questions, information about Trellism in general, but also Trellism specifically on Scadrial. As I think we mentioned in a previous episode, Trellism goes back really far on Scadrial, at least like the general concept, which is fascinating. And there's still plenty of questions as to how it relates to the current Trellism in Era 2 and Trell being an avatar of autonomy. Like, we still don't know exactly how those pieces are connected, but I find them incredibly interesting. And then the set tying into this in a very interesting way, particularly given the very, very, very end of Bands of Mourning, which we will talk about.
Let's first go way back into time, before the era of the Lord Ruler, before any of the characters that we know. There is a religion that is passed down, eventually getting into Zay's metal minds, that he tells us about, Trellism. Now, Trellism, well, actually, let's just go straight to the quote. Do you want to read this?
Yeah, let's do it. Quote, Trell was worshipped by a group known as the Nilazan, a people who lived far to the north. In their land, the day and night cycle was very odd. During some months of the year, it was dark for most of the day. During the summer, however, it only grew dark for a few hours at a time. The Nilazan believed that there was beauty in darkness and that the daylight was more profane. They saw the stars as the 1,000 eyes of Trell watching them. The sun was the single jealous eye of Trell's brother, Nalt. Since Nalt only had one eye, he made it blaze brightly to outshine his brother. The Nilazan, however, were not impressed and preferred to worship the quiet Trell, who watched over them even when Nalt obscured the sky. End quote. And that is the pitch that Sazed gives Vin about Trellism. This is the first time that we ever hear the word Trell.
And I want to simply follow it up with a quote from a little while later, continuing this conversation that Vin and Zayst has. He says this, quote, "It really is a good religion, Mistress Vin," Zay said. "Very gentle, yet very powerful. The Nilazan were not an advanced people, but they were quite determined. They mapped the entire night sky, counting and placing every major star." End quote. So we see a connection between their religious belief in Trell and the practical applications that may be why Zayst has their information stored in his metal mind. Like, this makes sense to me looking at the religion holistically and across time, is like, what thing of value did they really provide to the historical record? What made them last when some other religions were lost? It may have been this map of the night sky is like a clear indication of like value outside of their own religion.
Well, and Sazed actually uses their star charts, in order to place Scadrial back into its correct orbit.
And so we are then in a reliance or a strange bit of mirrored responsibility where Zayst is responsible for fixing everything, but he's doing that based on the history that was in his metal minds.
Yeah.
Of course, relying on that history to be accurate and to come from people who were doing accurate work in the past.
Yeah. There are a lot of sort of interesting little details in this description of Trellism that we can, in the way that we do, probably way over speculate about the importance of them.
Let's dive deep into
that's what we do here.
Over speculation shard pool. That's what we can call it. We're just going to go for a little swim in our over speculation pool. I believe that the most interesting thing is this division between the 1,000 eyes of Trell, represented by all the stars in the dark sky, and the brother Nault, the single eye of the sun. Normally, we see a lot of sun worship, and this is the opposite, which I found really interesting.
It is interesting. And it's also the second religion that we've seen in the Cosmere with two competing brother gods. So someone did ask Brandon about this. Word of Brandon, user by the name of Paladin Brewster, and this is all paraphrased. Quote, is there a link between Trell and Nault from Mistborn and New Relique and Vunmakik from Stormlight?
No, there isn't. Maybe just tenuously.
End quote. And as a sort of afterthought or asterisk, the person that transcribed this exchange added that Brandon sort of seemed confused about the question. So take that as you will.
But then we get this a little bit later where the questioner says, quote, in the ancient religion with Trell, the god, he had a brother Nault. Is Nault in any relation to Nalthis, the planet?
That's a good question. I'm going to raffo that for now. End quote.
So we get a non-confirmation, maybe even a little bit of confusion regarding the question of Nault related to New Relic and Vunmakak, but a positive association with Nault and Nalthis.
Maybe. I kind of think that second word of Brandon is maybe somewhat of a misdirect with the raffo.
Because it's so broad and just saying, is there any relation between Nault and Nalthis?
Yeah. Plus, I think sometimes Brandon just likes to raffo things like to make us speculate. And my thought, though, is that maybe it's not connected to Nalthis, but maybe there is a connection to another Cosmere planet. And perhaps because of this relationship to light and dark in the Trellism religion, maybe this is like more support for Trell being autonomy, who is, of course, mostly on Taldane, which is tidally locked, lightness, darkness. Maybe there's something there.
If there were an area of Scadrial that mimicked the life on Taldane, that hard divide between light and dark, it would make sense that it was in a region that had a similar structure because they're so far north. They get that weird aspect of long terms of dark and long terms of light.
And then my guess would be that those people would probably have been originally Darksiders, which would be like why they were worshiping the nighttime. That would be my guess.
Okay, so you're going way back that there were an original group of world hoppers who came from Darkside, settled in the north, and became these people.
The Trelligists.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
That is like crazy speculation.
My concept is softer, but it's that the situation that existed for those on Taldane was similar to these group of Trelligists on Scadrial, and that when any people are in similar circumstances, they are going to gravitate towards these specific religions based on the shards, that it's like a gravity well. Autonomy's out there somewhere, we'll say on Taldane as the sun, but that presence is felt as far as Scadrial because they're all connected. And so if you exist in a situation that kind of leads you towards looking at autonomy, you're going to like follow that more and more, is my soft concept. Because I don't think that they're necessarily world hoppers. Your concept is that they're world hoppers. That they're just like
but you think they are just like intuiting a shard and on a completely different planet?
I feel like it's closer that they're hearing the song of autonomy across time and space because they're in the same situation.
More likely than that would be that autonomy would have searched for people with similar qualities. It's weird though because on Taldane, autonomy primarily presents as the sun. So if anything, these would be like
anti-autonomous
Trelligists.
That's
if
very
Trell
funny.
is autonomy, or autonomy was like, you have to worship me no matter what you worship, and therefore I will create an avatar that is your god.
That's
Trell, like
corrupted kind
creepy.
of. Yes, I like that way more. That autonomy's all broken in a weird way, and it's just like, you think you can worship someone, not me?
Whatever you want to worship, it will be me.
It will always be me.
Every time you turn around, I'll be there.
I'll
be watching you.
It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the heralds and their madness, or the way that their magical malady is a reflection of who they were and kind of like their own personality twisted. If a baseline autonomy was like everybody gets choices, that's what autonomy means, right? But then a corrupted version of autonomy, a twisted version, would say you get whatever choice you want, but the only choice you can make is me. You can have it in whatever form is important to you, but it's always gonna be me.
It's gonna be me.
Exactly. I think that is the song that autonomy is singing. That's his tone.
This is apparently Brooke's musical interlude episode.
To me, that makes a lot of sense in terms of what maybe is the similarity between all of these people, is that they're looking for something. And on Taldane, the Lightsiders see autonomy in the sun, and we've experienced culture on that side through White Sand, but we haven't seen a lot of the Darksiders. I assume that they are also praying to something that in reality is autonomy, but they might think it's different than the sun. Does that make sense?
Yes. But there is like an indisputable fact, which is that like the sun is the shard. And like that is true because the investiture comes from the sun and is infused into the sand. You know, like you can't, that's not a question. That's not a like matter of what you believe. That is a literal fact.
But let's take the mythology from the Scadrians about Nalt, the sun, being a jealous god. If we connect that concept of, yes, 100% Taldane situation, autonomy is the sun, that's investiture power, the source. If he's actually a jealous god, then he would feel really angry about like the tidally locked aspect of his planet if there was a contradictory god on the other side.
Yeah.
So my concept is that he wouldn't allow that to exist. He would take a new form, become autonomous.
Well, because we know of all the shards, autonomy at least is the only one we know of right now that creates these multiple avatars of itself. So yeah, you would think it would just like spawn a couple shard babies and put them into the stars on the other side. Yes,
and then have everyone praying to the stars on Darkside. For the Southern Scadrians, they would name it Trell, or the Thousand Eyes of Trell. In reality, it's just another version of autonomy. I love that concept that really what we're dealing with here is like a very jealous girlfriend. Be like, she's banging, she's looking great as the sun, but then anytime someone glances at a tiny little star, she's like, nah, I'm gonna split off a little self, make sure that's in front of you. That's the thing you're always going to worship and always be brought back to.
It's interesting because obviously as we're talking about all of this, there is still just a lot of ambiguity and questions. And Sayes actually specifically says that the Trellism religion was like meant to be ambiguous, that there were a lot of issues that they didn't really have hard doctrine about, because part of the religion was allowing the followers of the religion to discover the truth for themselves, and they were encouraged to pray to Trell and like, you know, wait for sort of the answer from God, and that God Trell would respond to their petitions. And so there was a little bit of like individuality or autonomy about it, but that also does cause some uncertainty about what exactly is supposed to be happening within this religion.
It certainly reminds me of Pantheism.
Yes, very much so.
Which is Zay's religion for the most part. And that concept of you can pray, you can have a direct intervention with God. He's personally, or they are personally listening.
But that like the sort of solid tenets are pretty minimal.
Yeah, you got to kind of like figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
So Zay's certainly
seems to be a fan of Trellism.
100%. Let's connect the two. That's the deep lore and kind of the pre-Mistborn era 1 stuff. Let's
Trellism. And then in our modern era, we have Trellism.
That's the distinction we're going to use and how we hope to linguistically separate what we're talking about here. Modern Trellism seems very different.
Yeah, it is unclear like exactly how we got from Trellism to Trellism, because the Trellists say like, hey, we're just practicing this religion that was written down in the words of founding. You know, it's one of the OGs, so it's all cool here. But there seem to be some like big differences that definitely call into question, are you really practicing the religion that was in the words of founding? Or are you just taking that name and slapping it onto a whole different thing for legitimacy?
This is one of my biggest fears, is that we kind of presented one possibility of autonomy as the jealous girlfriend who needs to be in front of everyone and worship. But what if it's more like a virus, that what existed on Scadrial was Trellism, but then autonomy comes in like a virus and takes over that religion.
Yeah, and like co-opts it for...
But really is just like using it as the workstation to pump out his own religion, which is Trellism.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that was the case. It certainly seems like Trell came to the planet with the religion versus the people like discovering and or creating the religion on their own. We have some interesting sort of tenets that are presented for our modern day Trellism. Miles believes that Trell created him and presumably other Metalborn, quote, to see wrongs righted, end quote. And he also thinks that the teachings of Trellism prove that Metalborn and or maybe just Twinborns are special in some way. We never actually hear the precise religious teachings that like make Miles believe this, but that's his impression of what the religion teaches.
Now he takes that to an extreme, clearly, but I do think that there is an interesting aspect of survivorism, the more popular religion during Era 2, and this inherent belief in a specialness of the Metalborn, because, of course, survivorists are praying mainly to a Mistborn. Yeah. A incredibly powerful Metalborn, and they have kind of elevated, in many ways, these figures of their past, and like that's the important aspect of their religion. That, to me, seems very close to, well, if Mistborn Kelsier was amazing, Lord Mistborn is amazing, we should treat all Metalborn as amazing. And maybe
but I think
they should be better than us or lead us, like Miles believes.
I think there's a difference there because of the emphasis on worshiping the survivor and survivorism. You have to remember that they don't have Mistborn anymore. So Kelsier is many magnitudes better, more divine, mythical, in this instance, than any Metalborn that exists on their world. So to them, those two things are not the same. They're not going to say, because Kelsier is great, all Metalborn are great. They're like, no, you are a pale human shadow of this divine being who was a Mistborn.
Who, funnily enough, now is a pale shadow of what he once was.
That is true.
My only point is to continually remind us of like how there may have been twists on the existing religions, the existing, we'll say, religious energy that may have been adopted and twisted by autonomy or Trell to create Trellism. So Miles kind of could be taking a vibe that exists in Mistborn Era 2 and then turning it up to 11.
Yeah, maybe. Because again, like, we don't really hear any of the specific religious tenets of Trellism. We only hear how adherents of the religion, like, interpret what they hear, but we don't have a primary source, so to speak.
Sure. So for Miles, he kind of has this concept of wanting to stick it to the people in power, you know, stick it to the man.
He's definitely got like a social justice sort of angle that perhaps comes from his religion. He's upset that the people in the basin let the people in the roughs sort of like languish and didn't care about those people.
And what I find most interesting about Miles' philosophy is what Wax calls out maybe as the thing that makes him divergent or that doesn't align logically, and so therefore showing why Miles is a villain. But the concept that part of being a lawman was being jealous of the criminals who were allowed to take their power, use it how they wanted, you know, gain riches or abuse the system. You, as the lawman, want to do that. You want to use your power
break the rules.
To break the rules, but you can't. And so you devote yourself to making sure that nobody else can either. Because if you did it with all your power, be it Metalborn power, or if we're just talking about police, like the power of the state that is behind you, but because you're not allowed to use your power for badness, then nobody else can either. But Miles, and what Wax was pointing out, is like, well, you broke that code. You did not follow that path, but it's there in the back of your mind, in the back of his mind, in the back of all law people's mind, is like a jealousy that they can't break the rules in the same way. I feel like that's a haunting way of viewing his job as a lawkeeper and how close they all are.
Do you think that ties back to his religion? Do you think that's coming from Trellism?
I do believe that what Wax is calling out there is Miles went too far. So why did he go too far? I'm seeing this influence of Trellism as the primary reason that he went too far. All of a sudden he had many excuses or rationales for this jealousy. Why is he jealous? Well, because not only do lawbreakers get to use their power, but so do the Elendelites, people who are claiming to, you know, be working for the good of society. They get to abuse their power. Everybody's abusing their power. Now it's my turn. We're going to turn the screws a little bit.
I feel like it's almost more like Miles is upset that, like, he almost has too much autonomy. He's all by himself. Like, he's the only one trying to bring criminals to justice. He's not getting any help from other people who have power, like you're saying, either Metalborn or just political power. That seemed to me what he was, like, angry about, of like, you're going to put all these people out here and then you're not going to protect them. And I've been trying for years and years and years, but like, I'm just one person. I can't do it. And you left me out here by myself.
That might be his initial, you know, descent into madness. That's like the first step down the path. But eventually he comes to the point of like, no, I'm better than everyone else. I am the Bloodmaker extreme, you know, the...
Yeah, of course there's like a
changes in a
point
way
where it sort of turns in a weird way.
Yeah, and
I'm just trying to drill down on like, what can we find out about Trellism by examining the behaviors of people who claim to practice it?
So that's Miles. Let's go over to Palm from Shadows of Self.
Yeah, who's a little bit of a different circumstance, but I decided to throw her in here too.
Well, I think it's really important because if there's anyone who has been legitimately impacted by Trell, it has to be Palm because she has been spiked by Trell's metal.
Physically impacted.
Yes, exactly.
And of course, her whole thing is trying to liberate people from Harmony's grasp or control. She also believes that the people in power, like the governor and Wax, so like Metalborns and priests, are furthering Harmony's control over people. So kind of a different vibe than Miles, who wants to like take down people in power, but sort of for a different reason.
Palm has that aspect of a puppet who can see the strings
Right.
and wants to cut all of the strings.
Yeah, and we don't really hear Miles saying, like, everyone should be free from God. He is more just like, different people should be in power.
Exactly.
So a little bit of a difference there, although they are united in their passion for taking down the establishment of Elendel.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem of punk rock. We could, sometimes punk rock is really awesome, but occasionally you just run into assholes who want to break everything.
Yeah, it's like just anarchy.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a weird balance and a weird element of discovery that you got to figure out, like, what type of punk rock is good for you. But a lot of times when you're in a punk rock scene, be that on Scadrial or on Earth, you're just going to run into assholes because they're attracted to that chaos.
Yeah.
Miles is attracted to the chaos. Maybe Palm wasn't, but she was like forced into it, and then her brain kind of broke a bunch of times and was re-put together and stuff. So I don't want to say that she's maybe not as consenting in this takeover of Trell.
Yeah.
It kind of happened to her in some ways. But what if we take Palm's story as a servant of harmony, servant of the Lord Ruler, who is then broken by experience? My question would be, what does Palm's story have in connection with Miles? And what does it have in connection with the people that we talked about from long before Mistborn Era 1, the Trellism?
Mm-hmm.
What's similar between all of those individuals? What was open for Trell to come in, you know? If it's a spiritual realm aspect, like a little broken spiritual DNA, and the Spren can get in, what was broken in them that allowed Trell to get in?
Yeah, and I think that's where we sort of come back to, we don't even know if Trellism and Trellism are the same thing. I mean, fundamentally, I think that Palm felt betrayed by Harmony. And so in the same way that Miles wants to take down the political establishment of Elendel, Palm wants to take down the shard establishment, basically, and is just like, this shard is terrible, down with the queen, basically.
Yeah, well,
and then the first other thing that shows up and is like, I mean, I could be your shard. She's like, fine, any shard other than the one we have, is good. I'm down for, basically, is my impression. But then we also have a third Trellist that we see, Edwarn. And Edwarn doesn't really seem to have any of the same drives as Miles or Palm. He seems to be going for some type of democratization of the metallurgic powers, trying to produce them in ways other than just random genetic chance. But he also, only wants certain people to have the democratization of the powers, so not really democratic.
Not what I would call democracy. But he wants
them to be divorced from, again, the random chance. He wants to be able to produce them outside of genetics.
He wants control over the metallurgists in society, and doesn't want them to be in Harmony's control or is presenting as random chance.
Yeah.
His efforts to breed Allomancers, his hunt for not only different metals like the Trell metal, but also things like Et metal and into the Bands of Mourning, I think is what we are going to see from the set going forward, and how they are going to kind of grow in the Lost Metal.
Well, we'll see. It does appear that the set is a Trellist organization. We don't actually have that solid confirmed. It might just be Edwarn and some of the set are Trellist, but I think the whole organization is an organization of Trell. And with that, let's transition into talking about the set.
The key concept that I think Edwarn brings to the set, to summarize their philosophy, would be, quote, "The day of mighty men to be worshipped has gone, and with its passing goes the right of Allomancers to power," end quote. So this idea of controlling, maybe even innovating or creating new elements of metallurgy, what is possible, what hasn't been seen before or hasn't been seen since the Lord Ruler's time, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That's where their focus is.
Yeah, and like you said, they have a bunch of different ways that they are trying to do this, including possibly breeding maybe mistborns, or maybe they're just trying to make more twinborns, or just trying to increase the amount of allomancy in bloodlines. They're also, of course, playing with hemalurgy. I'm wondering if they were given the knowledge of hemalurgy by Trell. That would make sense to me. And then, of course, they're also trying to, like, incite war or destabilize the current government and have the Set take over Elendel. Those are sort of their, like, primary objectives as the Set so far.
I believe that their focus on, taking over and becoming the entity in control is going to be very much thrown off and made difficult by the introduction of the Southern Scadrians. I could be wrong, because that could, of course, just break their society and make it easier for the Set to take over. But I actually believe that they're playing on divisions primarily within the Elendel Basin, and those divisions are going to fall away as a external enemy rises, and that it's actually going to be harder for them to accomplish these goals now that we have the introduction of the Southern Scadrians and maybe even like technology that's ahead of where the Set wanted to be. Like maybe they were moving towards what the Southern Scadrians have, but now the Southern Scadrians are here and trading with Elendel.
Yeah.
So it's like undercutting a lot of the Set's efforts.
The Set has taken some of the technology that they've found from the Southern Scadrians. So they will have some of that technology themselves. I question how much of a future the Set really has. Like, you're saying they're probably going to play a really big role in the Lost Metal, and maybe they will, but this event at the end of Bands of Mourning really makes me wonder if, like, actually the Set is just going to be gone and we're going to be looking at a completely other conflict in the Lost Metal, which is going to be much, much grander. I know this is a little bit of like a spoiler for you because you're not done with your Bands of Mourning reread yet.
That's okay. I have read the book before once or twice.
Soft spoilers.
No soft spoilers here. # all spoilers all the time.
Of course, at the end of Bands of Mourning, we have that just mind-blowing scene where we find out that the Set has its own quote-unquote faceless immortals. Not clear if they're actually the same as the faceless immortals or if they're a completely different thing that has been made by Trell. They have glowing red eyes. They appear to be the servants of Trell. And I would love to just go through the conversation that Edwarn has with one of these red-eyed faceless immortals at the ends of Band of Mourning. I've cut out sort of all the middle pieces, so it really is like just the conversation. Okay,
stay with us here, folks. I'm going to play Edwarn, and Brooke is going to play the red-eyed faceless immortal, or the Refi. Quote, 2 weeks is longer than I expected.
Our timeline is not yours.
I was not complaining, merely observing. I'm perfectly willing to wait upon Trell's pleasure.
Are you? It's our understanding that you pushed for an acceleration.
I was merely stating my perspective so that a proper discourse can be engaged.
You didn't break or spill secrets.
I did not.
We are impressed.
Thank you.
The timeline will be accelerated as you have requested.
Excellent. What is that?
Our accelerated pace will no longer require the Set to have its full hierarchy.
But you need us to rule, to manage civilization on...
No longer. Recent advances have made civilization here too dangerous. Allowing it to continue risks further advances we cannot control, and so we have decided to remove life on this sphere instead. Thank you for your service. It has been accepted. You will be allowed to serve in another realm.
But...
The creature engaged the explosive device, blowing itself and suit to oblivion. End quote.
Really mind-blowing when you have really 3 books building up Edwarn, Mr. Suit, as this huge villain, and then the 1-2 punch of you will be allowed to serve in another realm. I'm like very intrigued, and then we've blown up.
Bam! Yeah.
Seems like serving in another realm is going to be difficult if you are blown up in the physical realm.
Yeah, there is a question of like, if that is real, how are they like resurrecting Edwarn? But I mean, I think this is exactly the threat that we are going to be seeing in the Lost Metal, where we have this question of like, is Scadrial going to survive at all?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that this exact event that the red-eyed faceless immortal is talking about is the event that Harmony
cannot see past.
Right, exactly. That there is some planet-killing event being planned, and perhaps, you know, there's nothing to say that this faceless immortal is not the only one that's been dispatched to members of the set to kill them. So I do wonder if the set even exists now.
Anymore.
Yeah.
I think that what we have been talking about, this concept of Trell stepping in and maybe taking over religions, twisting religions that did exist, is exactly what Trell may have just done at the end of Bands of Mourning with the set. They were serving a purpose loosely connected to Trell, and now Trell has stepped in and said, like, no, you're done. My agents are going to fill in what is ever necessary to accomplish the final goal, which is eliminating life all across Scadrial.
Or there was some other goal in mind, but as this red-eyed immortal says, recent advances, whatever that means, like maybe that's technology, maybe that's the bomb that exists, make civilization too dangerous, and so they're just like, nah, we're gonna scrap this one.
It certainly seems that the red-eyed faceless immortals present an interesting dilemma here on Scadrial, because my question is, did Trell create his own faceless immortals, or does Trell have faceless immortals throughout the Cosmere, and these are just other ones? I want to be a little bit more specific. Is the thing that we're seeing a mist wraith from Scadrial that Trell has dropped spikes into, making it a Trell faceless immortal? Or is it something he created off-world that like uses the same knowledge of mist wraith / Kandra, and it's like his version of a Kandra?
Yeah, I would lean towards thinking that this is an agent of Trell that is not a Kandra. It seems very different from Palm, for example, who was a Kandra spiked by autonomy.
Yeah.
You know, so it doesn't seem to be the same thing. I think this is like its own agents that have just been sent to Scadrial, and because Scadrians know of faceless immortals, that's how they are conceptualizing of the agents. But I think there is something completely different.
That's interesting. I am kind of the assumption that maybe going back to this concept of autonomy more as a virus than anything else, that he's looking for the weaknesses that exist on the planet. And one of the weaknesses created by the Lord Ruler, but then foolishly kept over by Harmony, is the Mist Wraith to Kandra connection. Like, that is a weakness inherent on Scadrial that Trell is then taking advantage of. So there's a bunch of Mist Wraiths around, and he just goes, I'll use 4 or 5 of these for my own. Unlike Palm, who was a long-serving Kandra with their own personality and their own spikes and history.
I think it's just there is an alien feeling about this entire conversation that makes me feel like Trell has sent aliens, like it's an outside influence that has infiltrated this planet, has perhaps played a part in persuading people to even create the set, like, period. Like, I wonder if the seed, the whisper in the ear of like the set's creation came from Trell to begin with. And then you have these sort of alien agents who are talking about the planet as, this sphere, and just the way that it is speaking makes it very much sound like an alien and not like a Kandra.
Well, my concept would be, this is not a Kandra. This is full autonomy. It is his metal dropped into a Mist Wraith.
Right, but that would still be a Kandra.
I mean, no, it's not a conjure. It is only a physical representation of Trell on this planet. And he is then able to
You think it's more like an avatar?
I think it's like an avatar, yes. But so what we're hearing, that alienness that you're hearing, is shard alienness. It is Trell speaking through this thing.
But then it's talking about Trell in the third person.
Of course,
you know,
as
are
one
you
weird
like
Trell
willing
would do.
to wait upon Trell's pleasure? And then it's also like talking in the plural of like, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I think Edwarn says there are like many faceless, red-eyed faceless immortals. Obviously, if they are agents of autonomies, he would still have control over them in some way. But I don't think it's just like a mech suit for autonomy.
Yeah, I kind of see it in this case. To me, it seems more like the mech suit for autonomy. And it's a mech suit that only can exist on Scadrial in this form. That basically, like, Zay's left open.
I think it's more like
can be taken
a
advantage
clone
of.
army.
Ooh, yeah. That's another good way of experiencing it. Just like, yeah, you can...
I think of it as, I forget what his name is, but the villain from She-Ra, who just has a bunch of clones of himself. There's just a bunch of him, but he can also like take over any of them at any time, but they are not him necessarily.
Understood. Yeah.
It's like sort of a hive mind situation.
Yeah. It's like consciousness can bounce between any of the clones, but they can also fully operate independently.
Yeah.
That's definitely how I would see this because of the metal necessary. Like if we're calling this a faceless immortal, maybe it doesn't need the same spike for sentience, but because that's how they're referring to it, my assumption is inside of this thing, there are two spikes of Trell.
But I think you're putting too much faith in their ability to like conceive of aliens. You know, like obviously you're going to look at this thing and your brain is going to label it something you know.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
And so I don't think we can just take their verbiage and be like, well, they say it's a faceless immortal, so I guess it's the same.
Let me restate then. If this is actually a faceless immortal and has spikes within it, that leans more to the mech suit type of argument that I was just making. But if it is not that case, that there's not metal allowing Trell to come into these forms, then it's more that avatar, and we have no real concept of how that's being done or accomplished.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going just like full alien thing that we don't know.
And I'm going with there's some metal connection here. That thing that we have seen and just quoted has some metal in it somehow. That's my guess.
Tell us what you think, listeners.
You can find us on all of your social media feeds, and you can also become a patron on Patreon. The Lost Metal coming out soon, may already be out. That means we enter into our very normal, always happening hibernation period after a book release.
Yes, so don't worry, we're going to give everyone time to read or listen, however you like to take these stories in. Probably 2 to 3 weeks for this one, just because they are shorter books. And then after that, we will start a breakdown of the Lost Metal and everything that we've read and learned, etc., etc. In between those times, we'll probably have some filler episodes with some words of Brandon, or some updates on news around the Cosmere, things like that. So stay tuned. Happy reading. And until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness,
journey before destination.